There is this persistent stereotype that people with ASD are individuals who lack empathy and can't understand emotions. Now, while it's true that many people on the spectrum don't show emotion in ways that typical people do, that doesn't mean that they lack empathy or they have no understanding of feelings. So let's go on record as saying that the notion that people with ASD lack empathy and can't recognize feelings is wrong. Many of these people on the spectrum say that they experience typical and sometimes even excessive empathy at times. Let's take a quick look at the overlap between ASD and alexithymia, which is the same thing as emotions blindness, which is a condition defined by difficulty understanding and identifying one's own emotions. Now, people with high levels of alexithymia may suspect that they're experiencing an emotion, but are unsure exactly what that emotion is. They could be mad, sad, glad, angry, anxious, or just overheated. So perhaps they do lack an emotions vocabulary, we would say. And statistically speaking, about 10% of the population at large and about 50% of people with ASD have some degree of alexithymia. Now, sometimes it's tempting to think that autism somehow causes alexithymia, but you can have autism without alexithymia and vice versa. Also, even though there are higher rates of alexithymia in people on the spectrum, there are equally high rates in people with eating disorders, depression, substance abuse, schizophrenia. So, can alexithymia explain why some people on the spectrum have difficulties with emotions and some don't? Perhaps it's alexithymia, not ASD, that causes the emotional difficulties we hear about from people on the spectrum. It can be said that individuals with ASD, but those who don't have alexithymia, show typical levels of empathy, whereas people with alexithymia, regardless of whether they have ASD or not, tend to be less empathic. So ASD is not associated with a lack of empathy, but we could say alexithymia is. Having said that, people with alexithymia may still care about others' feelings. The inability to recognize and understand feelings makes it difficult to respond empathically. So as a side point, for those of you who are listening and have alexithymia and or ASD, recognizing an emotion in a face depends in part on information from the eyes and mouth. So I often state that you want to pay attention to facial cues and voice inflection more so than the words, because body language is conveying of the speaker's message than the actual words. Now, I do understand that people with ASD often avoid looking into other people's eyes, which could contribute to their difficulty detecting emotions. So one of the things I advise is to practice looking the speaker in the eyes and paying attention to what their face says and what their voice volume and voice pitch and voice inflection have to say. So a good question to ask is, what is driving gaze avoidance? Is it ASD or is it alexithymia? Both? Neither. People with ASD, whether they have alexithymia or not, tend to spend less time looking at faces than those who don't have ASD. But to drive home my main point here, if people assume that someone with ASD lacks empathy, they will be wrong at least 50% of the time, because only half of people with ASD have alexithymia. So making this assumption is unfair, and it also can be very hurtful. And to those of you who are listening who want to develop some social skills and emotional literacy, especially in the context of a neurodiverse marriage, feel free to click on the link below this video for a program that will help you raise your social IQ and your emotional IQ.